Hey y'all, my name is Melissa and I write the blog Melly Sews and I design blank slate patterns, and I'm also the author of the book Sundressing. Today we're going to be sewing one of my patterns, the Oceanside Pants. I'm looking forward to sewing with you and I hope you enjoy sewing with me today. Let's start by talking about a few of the fabric choices that you can make for these pants. The sample version that I have here, these are linen, and linen is a little bit of a heavier fabric, and it also tends to wrinkle. So if you kind of are okay with the rumply look, that's a good look for these pants. But there are some other fabric choices that I have laid out here that we can talk about. This here is a rayon fabric, and as you can see, this is a very flowy fabric. It has a lot of drape to it. So if you make them out of this fabric, this is going to be pretty clingy to the body and it's really going to flow. If you like to accentuate your curves, this might be a good choice for the pattern. Right here I have a similarly thin fabric, but this is cotton gauze. And this has a lot more body. You can see that it doesn't flow over my arm quite the same as the rayon did. It's also slightly sheer. We can see through it. This is a better choice for something like a beach cover-up version of the shorts or pants because you would be wearing something underneath. Next to that, I've got, this is also cotton. This is double gauze cotton. And double gauze cotton is actually 2 layers of fabric, of a loose weave fabric, and they are stitched together. You can see one of the stitches right there, every so often. And this fabric is very soft. It doesn't have a lot of body. It's similar to the rayon in that it's a very drapey kind of fabric. It does have a little more body than the rayon. The thing I like about cotton gauze is it's not see-through and it gets softer every time you wash it. So this does drape, not as much as the linen or the rayon, but enough where you're not going to feel like you're wearing wide leg clown pants or something. Finally, I've got a sample here of corduroy fabric. And corduroy fabric is a very tight weave with this nap on the front. So if you choose something like corduroy, which has a lot of body, you can see how this almost stands up on its own. I wouldn't maybe choose this for the pants with those wide legs because it's going to make the bottom very wide. However, it's a very good choice if you wanted to make the shorts version of this pattern. It's not see-through. The only thing you have to be aware of when you are using something like corduroy is it does have a direction on it. You can see the stripes on the corduroy. So you want to make sure that you cut out this fabric with the stripes running vertically up and down your body. It would look strange otherwise. So those are some of the fabric options that you could use for these pants. I've got the linen ones right here. And we're going to talk about how to sew these once you've chosen the fabric. So you can see this has a little bit of a paper bag waist detail. It's got a drawstring, and it's got these square patch pockets here with the folded edge and button detail. We're going to talk about all of that, and we're going to use both the shorts version and the pants version in some of our samples here. That's one of the things I love about this pattern is that it's so versatile. You can do the shorts, you can do the pants, you can do lots of different fabrics for lots of different looks. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So the first step to sew these is the pockets, and I have the 2 pocket pieces cut out here. You need 2 pieces for each pocket. You're going to place these right sides together. And then we're going to stitch, leaving a gap in the short edge around to the corners and across. So when you're done stitching, the pocket is going to look like this. So I've got this gap here, and then I've stitched around the other edges. After you've got this stitch, you need to clip the corners before we turn this right side out, because if you don't, you're going to have rounded, bunchy corners. So what you want to do is cut at a diagonal and get as close to the corner as possible without cutting through it. So we're going to clip all 4 of those corners. If you're working with a particularly bulky fabric like linen, you might want to actually do another step here And after you cut across the corner, you can do another diagonal cut on that new corner to reduce the bulk even further. And what that's going to do is that's just going to give you really nice sharp corners. So once you've clipped the corners, we're going to turn this right side out. And that's why we left that opening. So you'll use your finger to get into the corners and get them out as much as possible. And then you can either use a point turning tool, or sometimes I like to use the back end of a seam ripper if you have a flat one like this to help poke into the corners more. Resist the urge to use the sharp edge here, because all you'll do is poke a hole in the corner. But so I can use that to get a little further into the corners than my fingers would go and really get those corners poked out. Make sure to do that on all 4 corners. And then we are going to press this pocket. So when we press this, it's a good idea to finger press first, and you want to make sure that on the opening here that the fabric is turned towards the inside of the pocket, and that will get sewn closed when we top stitch the pocket. So let's go ahead and press these edges flat. Just make sure that this pocket is nice and crisp to put on the pants. Next, to make sure that those edges stay nice and flat, we're going to go ahead and top stitch around all 4 edges, and that will also close up the gap that we've left for turning. So I like to start on this in the middle of a long edge, so that I can overlap some on the way back. And I'm just sewing about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the pocket. Then we'll go ahead and make sure that that gap gets closed up. Stop with the needle down at each corner, and then lift the foot to turn your fabric to continue stitching. That'll give you a nice sharp corner with the thread too. Sometimes when you're turning a corner, your machine may have trouble getting past that corner to start stitching again. If that's the case, it's okay to go ahead and hand crank your machine 1 or 2 stitches just until there's enough fabric over there on the feed dogs so that it'll start pulling the fabric through. We'll go ahead and finish this edge, and I'll overlap my stitching a couple stitches and then cut it. So trim these threads, and the next step on the pocket here would be to sew the buttonhole. So I've actually got a pocket here with the buttonhole sewn on. The marking on the pattern indicates where you should stitch this, and you'll go ahead and stitch that buttonhole. And I want to show you, if you want a nice little pop of color or contrast on your pants, you can also use a different fabric for the back side of the pocket. When you do that, and you finish that buttonhole and fold it down, you have this nice little pop of a different color that can be really cute on these pants. And then the button needs to be sewn on before you apply the pocket to the pants. There's also a little cheater trick here. If you really hate sewing buttonholes and you are never going to be unbuttoning this, because really the buttonhole is just decorative here, you can also just fold your pocket and then stitch the buttonhole right through all of the layers, or sorry, stitch the button right through all of the layers, and then you can skip the buttonhole entirely. Once you've got your pocket to this stage, you've got the button sewn on, the top stitching is all done, then you're ready to put the pocket on the pants leg. So here is a pants leg, and there's an indication on the pattern for the entire marking of the pocket, but what I like to do is just mark the bottom front corner, and if you go over about an inch from each corner, that's usually enough for you to line up the rest of the pocket. And that also is less marking that you have to make sure gets off of the pants once you're done sewing them. It's always a good idea when you're going to be marking on the right side of your fabric to make sure to use something that's going to wash off and that you've tested it on that fabric. Because I've had fabrics where I've marked with chalk and you would think chalk washes off of everything, but sometimes it doesn't. So we've used chalk to mark here, and we're going to place the pocket onto the pants, and I'm lining up the edges with the corner and making sure that it is straight in both directions. So we'll go ahead and pin that on, and I just stick a few pins somewhere in the middle of this just to keep the pocket from shifting while it's in the machine. I don't typically pin too much too close to the edges, maybe one in each corner, because that's more pins to take out later. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to stitch right on top of the top stitching of the pocket, or you can stitch right next to it, whichever one you prefer. But there will be a second line of stitching here, so you want to match the same stitch length that you used to do the top stitching on the pocket if you're going to be stitching on top of the same line. So let's put this in the machine, and we're going to go ahead and hand crank to line the needle up right in between two stitches, right on the edge of that pocket there, and you want the top stitching line lined up with the needle. And then we're just going to stitch a couple stitches, and you want to make sure to back stitch a couple stitches here too, because at the edges of the pocket, if you don't backstitch, they can easily tear away from the pants during use. So it's a good idea to backstitch maybe even a couple times, like sew 2 or 3 stitches, backstitch 2 or 3 stitches, and then repeat before going on. And then we'll sew forward right on top of that top stitching line. And just like when we were top stitching, you'll stop with the needle down at the corners, pull up your presser foot, and then continue to stitch. If you really like decorative top stitching, you can also switch to a thicker top stitching thread for this step, and that will hide your thread underneath more effectively. And it will also, if you choose, you can add a contrast that way. So last side here, we'll get to that corner, and we'll stitch to the corner fold here, and then just like we did at the beginning, we want to back stitch a few times and repeat to make sure that pocket edge is secure. So here's the pocket on the pants. Remove the rest of these pins, and you want to trim any extra threads out. Now, when I was stitching here, I used a lighter colored thread than I used for the top stitching on this. So you can see where I stitched on top of the line. And you can also see where I didn't stitch because this stitching is the darker color. And since it's reinforced, it should hold well at these edges where you backstitched, but that's the reason. So when you're putting your hand in, that you're not tearing the pocket away from the pants. After you've got both of the pockets applied, you're going to lay the two pants pieces right sides together, and there are no side seams on this pattern. So the next step is going to be to sew the front rise to the front rise and to sew the back rise curve to the back rise. Once you have those two pieces sewn, then it's going to look something like this. And you want to fold your pants or shorts so that the rise seam, this is the front rise and this is the back rise, so that they're right on top of each other. And then that will allow you to fold out the inseam and match those raw edges for the inseam. And then you can sew in just one long seam. Of course, that'll be longer if you are sewing the pants than it is on the shorts. On this pair of shorts, I've gone ahead and after I sewed the inseam, I've gone ahead and hemmed. This is done just by folding up the raw edge, 1/4 inch, and then folding it up another inch to get that hem, and then I've stitched through. And I've done a similar thing at the top here for the waistband. However, before you fold the waistband casing, there's another step on these shorts. You have to sew a buttonhole on either side of the center front seam. This is going to allow us to put the drawstring in through the waist casing. So you'd sew those buttonholes first, then you fold the waist casing down, and you're going to stitch once right around the bottom, all the way around the waist casing. Then you move your stitching over 1/2 inch, so it's about a finger's width for me, and you're going to stitch again, and you'll notice that that's like a 1/4 inch from the edge of the shorts. What that does is that's going to create this sort of very small paper bag waist that you can see on the sample pants here, and it has just that little edge that's above the drawstring that can pull in and creates that little bit of detail. The drawstring is a long tube that you're going to sew right sides together, and then you'll turn that right sides out, and then you cut the drawstring piece in half so that you have two ends of the drawstring. The reason you do that is because you're going to place a piece of elastic in between, and then the two drawstring tubes are sewn to the elastic. The reason this is done, I've had several pairs of pants that have just the plain drawstring without the elastic in them. And it's always a little bit uncomfortable because that drawstring can cut into you when you pull it tight enough to keep your pants up. So if you add a little bit of elastic, about half the width of the waistline, you're going to give a little bit of give to that drawstring, which makes it much more comfortable to wear. So once you've got the two ends of the drawstring sewn to the elastic in the middle, you are going to add a safety pin to the end and use that safety pin to pull this through the waist casing that we sewed. So this is why we had to put in the buttonholes. You'll come right in through the buttonhole and just pull that drawstring in, and it will go through all the way around to the other side. Now, one tip when you're putting in the drawstring at the waistline, you want to make sure that when you sewed the waist casing down, that your seam allowances were both pressed in the same direction. So I finished this seam allowance with a serger. You can also finish with pinking shears, you could do a French seam, whatever you want, but both of the seam edges, the raw edges of the fabric, need to be pointed in that direction. Similar to the front, if I flip it around to the front, both of them are pointed in this direction. What that does is it makes sure as I'm bringing this safety pin around through the waist casing that I'm not going to accidentally get under the seam and get stuck where I can't push my safety pin through. So you want them to be facing that same direction so that you can easily pull the drawstring all the way around the shorts, and then it'll come back out the other buttonhole here, and you can tie these shorts in the front. Now, that is a very small drawstring. It is a 1/2-inch drawstring, and some heavier fabrics may not respond well or may kind of pull that at your waist to where you feel like you're always pulling your pants up. So if you're using a heavier fabric or you just feel like you want extra support, there's an alternate way to do the waistband for this. This will eliminate that little paper bag detail at the top of the waistband, but you can just fold the casing down on the inside, and then we've left an opening on the casing right here. And you notice there's no buttonholes on the front edge. So if you do this, I'm using 1-inch here woven elastic. Woven is probably the firmest elastic that you can get. And I've got that safety pinned through. And I am going to feed that through the waistline casing. And just like with the other pair of shorts, I made sure that the seam allowances were both pressed to the same side so that I don't get stuck with my safety pin behind them. So we'll feed this all through. Now this makes the elastic wider, obviously, which means that it has more holding power if you choose this method of doing the waistband. And it won't have that drawstring detail in the front like the sample pants have. As you pull your elastic through the waistband, you want to make sure that the end of the elastic doesn't get lost inside your casing. And if it starts to get close, you need to keep an eye on it. If it starts to get close, you may want to actually take one of the pins and pin that end of the elastic to the waistband so that it can't go all the way inside. Okay, once we've got the safety pin coming out the other end, we want to pull out enough elastic to be able to sew these into a loop. And you want to also check and make sure that you haven't twisted the elastic anywhere in the pants. You'll overlap the two ends, making sure that they have not twisted. And we're going to stitch a square around this edge here to secure this elastic. So if you just start with your needle on the corner of the elastic, we're using just a basic straight stitch here. Stitch around. With your needle down, go ahead and turn your elastic. And then complete that square. So you can see I've got the little square of the elastic sewn, so it's joined together and it's nice and sturdy. It's not going to come apart. And then you just kind of pull your shorts waistband to get that elastic evenly distributed. And then finally, you need to sew the opening shut. So you actually want the waistband to still be lying flat there, and you're just going to put that back in the machine. And sew right close to the edge of the waistband to get that closed. So there we go. That is an alternate waistband method that you can use on these pants. It doesn't require any different alterations to the pattern other than you don't sew the two lines on the waistband, and you do need a piece of elastic that's equivalent to the waist measurement of the person wearing them. So if that's you, it would be your waist measurement. And then inserted like so. So we have gone ahead and we have sewn the pockets, showed you how to clip corners, how to turn pockets right side out. We've talked about top stitching and sewing the pockets on, and how you can either sew a buttonhole onto these pants or shorts, or you can totally just cheat and you can sew the button right through the pocket. Attach the pocket to the pants, and then there are two different waistline methods that you can use. You can use elastic all the way around like we are showing here, or you can use a drawstring waistband with this paper bag detail like we've got on the sample pants here. Thank you for joining me today. I have enjoyed sewing with you. I hope you've enjoyed sewing with me.